Okay. Hello, everyone. Today I am talking about my buyer's consultation. First off, what is a buyer's consultation? This is where you sit down with the buyer and you really walk through the process. You talk about what you do different from other agents, help them learn about the market, and put a plan together for them moving forward. I really think it's so important to do a buyer's consultation as soon as possible and with everyone. You should be doing a consultation with your mother. Like, this is so important because it sets clear expectations. It also shows your value on the front end. And, if it is a family member, you really want to show them that, they want to work with you, not just because you're family, but because you're knowledgeable and really are there to support them throughout this process. Uh, so, as I said, I'm trying to get anybody into a consultation, whether they're looking to buy tomorrow or they're going to buy in a year, because a lot of buyers don't know what they don't know. I always say, and the easiest people to get into a consultation are first time home buyers. So you may have heard my first time home buyer script, but if not, this is what I say if I meet a first time home buyer. Well, actually, I specialize in first time home buyers, and I think the most important part of the home buying process is education. So, what I like to do is sit down and walk through the process from getting pre approved for a loan to getting your keys and moving in. We'll talk about the current market, what I do different from other agents, and put a plan together for you moving forward. Would you like to set up a time to do that? You can find this. If you don't have a copy of my first time home buyer script, definitely reach out to me and I can get it to you. But here we go. So, two other things before I get started. Ideally, you want to do this in the office, make it serious, show that you're a professional. I always send a calendar invite to the buyer to show the professionalism. I try to do it in the office. If that doesn't work for them, I will do it at a coffee shop. That is another option. I also have done it via Zoom or Google Meets before. As you may be starting to work with an out of state buyer, it is important to get face to face and to teach them about the process here in Georgia if they're not from the greater Georgia area and they're buying in Georgia for the first time, or if they're a first time home buyer. So, all right, let me share my screen. Oops. Okay. So, this is what I use to walk through the home buying process. This is such a great tool that really can help you show the process and hit the highlights of it so that they have an overall understanding. Uh, I print out a copy for myself and I print out a copy for the home buyer, and we sit down and we walk through this together. So, first step, meet your realtor for your buyer's consultation. We're here today, hire your realtor. We'll talk more about that as we go through this process. And then the next thing that you're going to want to do is get pre-approved. Do you know the difference between being pre-approved and pre-qualified? If not, like pre-qualified, you kind of tell them how much money you make, what kind of debt you have, but they don't ask for any verification. We need to get you pre-approved where they're going to pull credit, they're going to ask for income verification so that you can provide confidence to that seller that you are able to close on the property. We can't make an offer until we have a pre-approval, and we do not go out and look at homes until you're pre-approved. And the reason for that is I don't want you to be disappointed. If we go out that first day and you find the perfect property, I want you to be able to make an offer. So, by the time you get your ducks in a row, that house could be gone and you're going to compare every home to the one that got away. And that's going to make this process really, really hard. So, a few things to know about that pre approval process is you can use whatever lender that you want. I just say to stay away from big banks. Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, they are not good at originating loans. They're fine at servicing loans, but they're not great at originating loans because they have so many checks and balances. A lot of them only work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I know Bank of America, you have to call them on a recorded line. You can't text them. They don't even give you their cell phone number for the lender. And that can make this process really difficult, especially because real estate doesn't work 9 to 5. A lot of times we're writing offers in the evening or we're going out to see homes on the weekend and we need to write an offer. So it is important, and I think it's best to have a local lender. This is a true story and something that happened to my first buyer years ago when I started in this business. They had Wells Fargo. I was told, we shouldn't use big banks, and I told him that, but I was just excited to have a client. So we went out, we're looking at properties, we found a condo that he liked, we made an offer on it, and the listing agent calls me and goes, "Hey, your offer's great. We'll actually accept it on one condition. I will never work with Bank of America, Chase, or Wells Fargo again. I gave them a chance a few months ago, and we closed 15 days late. I would rather sit on the market than take your offer. I'll talk to my buy sellers about it, but I advise you changing the lender." So we ended up changing lender and we ended up closing. But this is true in the market. If you are in a competitive situation, you do not want to be working with the big bank because the local lender is going to win out because a lot of agents know the difficulties there are to work with these banks. I have lenders that I can recommend to you. The reason I recommend them, and I want to make this clear, I do not get a kickback from recommending them. That's illegal. They cannot do that. I recommend them because they have great products. They answer the phone and they're really good at what they do. They're also going to be available on the weekends. They're going to be available by text, and they can get the deals closed without a problem. So if you'd like, I can send them to you. Okay. Once you're pre-approved, I'm going to set up a search on the MLS. One thing that I do different from other agents is I do set up an auto search. However, the auto search is set up so that all the properties come to me first, and then I weed out the bad ones. Based on what we talk about, I'm going to know if some of them are a definite no based on what you want. I like to say I'm like a fine wine, I get better with time. So at the beginning, our search is going to be wide. We're going to be uh, I'm going to be sending you more properties because as you give me feedback, that's going to help me narrow that search down. You will have a unique portal that's just yours. And what you can do in that portal is you can heart properties, trash them. There's a light bulb option, which is like a maybe, and you can put comments on those properties. That is great. For me, I can see all that information and continue to get an idea of exactly what you're looking for. But like I said, when I put the search criteria in, I can't put in, not on the main road, doesn't have a sloping backyard, is open concept. So if those are things that are important to you, I feel that it's my job as your agent to weed out the ones that don't meet those criteria. And that is something that I do. Um, Once we have some properties that you'd like to see, we go and we set up times to see them. We are very flexible around your schedule. I know you probably work a 9 to 5. We can go in the evenings. We can go on weekends to see properties. We can also, go at lunchtime, whatever works. The rule is I just need at least, 28 to 48 hours to make appointments. A lot of the occupied properties need a day's notice in order to get an appointment. So I need that time to be able to set up the appointments so that we can get in there and have it be a seamless showing situation. Additionally, I want to make it clear you will never be hindered by my schedule. I can only be so many places at once, and therefore, if our schedules don't align, that's not a problem. I have showing assistants that can take you to get into the homes in a timely manner. They're going to really just be a door opener. They can answer basic questions. But what I'll do is I'll check in with you after the showings and see if you have any additional questions or you want to make an offer on the property. If we feel that it's needed, I can also go see the property on my own time to check it and put my own eyes on it. But I don't want you to be hindered by my schedule. So I do have these showing assistants that can help you. Before our showings, I do try to request the disclosures from the listing agent. I can't always get them, but I try to get them before the showing because this gives us a little additional information about the property. So a seller's property disclosure, that is a disclosure that's filled out by the seller telling us a little more about how old's the hot water heater, how old's the roof, have they had any leaks, have they done any additions to the property, what's staying with the home, is the washer and dryer included. This just gives us that knowledge and information and is part of the contract. Additionally, there's a community association disclosure if the property is in an HOA. This will tell us how much the HOA is and what the HOA is covering. There's also a question on there around, is there any special assessments coming up or anything like that. I will try to get this information on the front end just so you are aware. Disclosures are not required in Georgia, and there may be properties that don't have seller property disclosures because investors usually don't fill them out. So properties that were being rented or were flipped, a lot of investors don't want to put that in the contract because they might not know something because they haven't lived in that home. So usually we only see disclosures with someone that has lived in the property. This isn't an issue. It's something to be aware of, but we do a thorough inspection either way to protect you in this purchase. All right, so after we go out, we look at some homes. Some of the things that I like to do when showing you homes is I'm pointing out the things that you may not notice because you want to look at the pretty stuff or the nice things. I point out the functionality of the home a lot of times. So I'll be like, hey, like you had mentioned that you wanted a large backyard. This one's kind of small. Or this kitchen's great and it's beautiful, but they don't have a pantry. Is that going to be an issue for you? I just kind of point out those little things that I see because I've seen a lot of properties. Once we find a home that you are interested in, we make an offer. The first thing I do before making that offer is I call the listing agent. First, I want to create some rapport and show them that we're going to be great to work with. Two, I want to have an understanding, do they have any offers? That will change how we make an offer on the property because if we're competing, we have to be more competitive with our offer. Now, if I will also ask, why is the seller moving? I like to understand motivation if I can. If they have stronger motivation, they're going to be easier to negotiate with, right? The seller that is moving for a job and needs to be there in 3 months, like they have solid timeline, they have to be out. So they're going to be usually easier to negotiate with versus that seller that's maybe, oh, they're downsizing, they're not in a hurry, they don't have any place to be, they're going to buy a home after, they're going to go in a rental for a little while. That person might be harder to negotiate with because they don't have a solid timeline or a solid motivation to get out of that home quickly. I also will ask the listing agent, is there anything important to the seller in an offer? Especially when we're competing, it is not always about the highest price. Money does talk, but some sellers may want a short closing or a longer closing or ask to rent the property back after closing, and that might be of more value to them than the highest price. So we just want to get an understanding of the situation and what's going on. I'll write up the offer. We'll talk about it. What I like to do is I send you the offer through Remind, our signing program, and then I like to get on a call together and walk through line by line with you. I want you to have a full understanding of what you're signing and what you're agreeing to there. Then we'll submit that offer. Once we come to terms, we will be under contract. The next piece is you will have to make what's called an earnest money deposit. Earnest money is a good faith deposit. You got to have skin in the game in order for the seller to take the home off the market. This is your money and it is credited to you at closing, as long as we do not default on the contract. I protect your earnest money. If I made a mistake in the contract and caused you to lose your earnest money, I will write you a check out of my pocket for that. I do this all the time. You do not. I believe it's my job to protect you and that earnest money. And I'm going to let you know throughout the process when that money's protected and when it's not. I've never had a client lose earnest money because of a mistake that I made. I had two clients lose earnest money, and it was because they decided not to buy the properties the week before closing. In those scenarios, where we've been under contract for over 20 days, I personally think the seller is entitled to some money because they're going to have to go answer to every other buyer what happened. And so those were unique scenarios, and um, I don't see them often there. And that's why, because I follow the contract to the T, that I know that I can protect your earnest money as long as you follow it as well. And like I said, I'm here throughout that process to let you know when that earnest money is protected. And the first place that it's protected is with this buyer's due diligence period. Due diligence in Georgia is actually really awesome for buyers. It really protects them. This period tends to be between 3 and 10 days. It just depends on if we're competing or not and what the situation is. And during the due diligence period, you can back out from the contract without a reason anytime you want during this period of time, during those 3 to 10 days. That means you wake up, you had a bad dream about the property, you don't want it anymore. You let me know. We send a unilateral termination, no harm, no foul. You get that earnest money back, and we move on to the next thing. During the due diligence period, this is when we do our inspections. We're going to do a home inspection. The home inspector, they're a jack of all trades, right? They're going to be checking the roof, the plumbing, the HVAC, all the appliances, electrical, and they're going to provide a very thorough report around that with pictures of everything. We will also do a wood infestation inspection, which is a termite inspection, and a pest inspection, because we want to be confident that you're not going to have an issue with these things when purchasing. Um, the thing about the inspection is, ideally, I would love for you to be able to go to the end of the inspection. You don't want to go to the whole thing. You'll be bored. You want to let that inspector go through their checklist, hit all the things that they're looking for. But going to the end of the inspection is really helpful because the inspector is going to walk you through their report. They're going to show you the things that they found that could be an issue. And just so you know, the inspector's putting on the report the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like all of it's going to be on there, and it's going to show that they checked every system and looked at all these pieces. But, I'm not the inspector. The inspector has the knowledge and information. So they're going to be able to tell you, like, hey, this is more like a $10, $20 Home Depot fix. This is a major item that you should really focus on, talking to the seller about, seeing if they can fix it or provide you some money for that thing. But I'd like you to be there so you can hear it directly from the inspector and you can ask any follow-up questions. Now, if you're not able to be at the end of the inspection, that is not a problem. Like I said, they take pictures of everything when they go to inspect, and we can always get on a call and discuss with the inspector afterwards. Um, if in the inspection, the inspector's like, hey, we need an expert to look at this item or that item. I have people that can come out. I have a roofer, I have HVAC people that can come look at those specific items, an electrician if needed. So we will get that all done during our due diligence period. We will review the inspection together. Additionally, I did want to mention the HOA info. When we go to make our offer, if the property is in an HOA, like a townhome or a condo that really covers like the exterior maintenance of your unit, including the roof and the windows and things, like that's a lot of big expense for an HOA. I like to go to the extra mile for you, and I request financial documents for the community. So what I'm looking for is income statement, budget, balance sheet. We want to see that the community is running in a profit, meaning they're able to put money into the reserve account. They have a decent reserve account. We don't want to see too many liabilities on their books. We just want to understand the financial health of the community. I can't promise anything, but my goal is to give you a good understanding that, when you walk in there, they're hopefully not going to raise that HOA right away or need a special assessment because they have money in reserves. They, in the last year, their budget to what they actually spent was right on track, or they actually spent less than the budget, which is really good. So we'll take a look at that. Additionally, I go even further, and if available, I'm going to ask for the board meeting minutes. The financials can tell me one thing. The board meeting minutes really show me how the community is being run. What are they contemplating? What are they thinking about in regards to projects? I actually had a client a few years ago. She was making an offer on a condo, and we asked for the financials. They got them to us. They looked okay. There was nothing like alarming on there. We also got the board meeting minutes. And on the board meeting minutes, it said expected increase to the HOA 20 to 25% in the next year. Unfortunately, that changed the economic model for my buyer. She was felt like she was towards the top of her budget. The HOA was already over $400 a month. This was going to bring it over $500 a month. She was like, honestly, I'm just not comfortable with that monthly payment. And I totally understand. We backed out during our due diligence period. She got her earnest money back and we moved on. And she was so happy that we had that information so that she could make an educated decision. So it is important that we do review that info and we ask the seller to provide it in our offer. And then we can review it during our due diligence period. If we have any additional questions, we can present them to the seller and ask them to get it from the HOA. After, our inspection and we look at the HOA documents, we have the option to, kind of ask for things to be done by the seller. So, what we're looking for in inspection, I want to make it clear there is not a perfect property. We are looking for broken bones, not scratches and bruises. Every home is going to have a couple dings here and there. There's going to be a few small $5, $10, $20 Home Depot fixes. We're looking for the major items that are going to cost, a significant amount of money for you, and we're going to use that and negotiate for either the seller to do repairs or for money instead of repairs. So if we ask the seller to do repairs, they're going to be written very specific and to be completed by a licensed whatever that item is. So a licensed electrician, a licensed plumber. We don't want that work done by their Uncle Joe. We want it done by someone that specializes in this thing that we're asking them to fix. So we will also ask for proof. We'll ask for an invoice/receipt as proof of completion, and we will ask for it to be completed at least a few days before closing so that we can also check it, just because we want to ensure that they did it correctly. If you don't want them to do the repairs, we can always ask for money instead of repairs. This money is in the form of what's called seller paid closing costs. And you can only get seller paid closing costs up to your actual closing costs. So, myself and the lender, I will be in contact with them to have a full understanding, of where your closing costs will be, so we don't ask for too much. But I'm confident, this due diligence period will be enough time for us to go through all that information and come to a win-win between you and a seller. After this due diligence period, we go into the loan approval process. We have two more contingencies here. We have the financing contingency and the appraisal contingency. Financing contingency, I've been having my clients get underwritten up front. So what this means is, a normal financing contingency is around 10 to 15 days. That's most common. And this is the time period for the underwriter. So the person at the lending institution that's really deep diving into your financials, looking at the contract, looking at everything from the HOA, and they're the one that makes the final stamp of approval, like, yes, we're going to approve this loan and lend the money to you. What we want to do, though, is have you underwritten up front. So any additional documentation that's needed, they get that on the front end. And what this does is it sets us apart from other buyers. We can have what's called a 0-day financing contingency and be that much more well approved than the next buyer who has 14-day financing. Because during your financing contingency, if you got denied for the loan, you could back out and you would get your earnest money back. Again, no harm, no foul. However, getting yourself underwritten up front just sets us apart. And as long as you don't change your financial situation, meaning you don't go buy a car during the process, you don't with a loan, right? You don't go get additional lines of credit, you don't go buy the furniture on credit, you don't change jobs and have a lower income during that time period. You want to keep your financial situation the same. You don't want to open any credit cards at Lowe's or at any other stores. You can use your credit cards like normal, but you don't want to change your debt ratio. So you don't want to add new uh, debt to your financial situation. So as long as you don't do that, you will be fine as long as we stay within the budget. Additionally, the last contingency that protects that earnest money, that's our appraisal contingency. And what an appraisal is a third party comes out, looks at the property, and warrants the value. They're going to say, yes, it is worth the amount that you are paying for it in the contract. Maybe it's worth more, or if it's worth less, we have a few potential issues there. So your lender will only lend up to the appraised value. So if you are buying a property for $100,000 and it only appraises for 95,000, the lender is only going to lend up to that $95,000. So if the appraisal comes back low, you have three options. One, and the most common, is we ask the seller to reduce the purchase price down to the appraised value. Now, most people are buying homes with loans, so if we feel the appraisal was fair, they used comps that were realistic. This is a common thing that will continue to be a problem for that seller. So they're likely, can't promise anything, to reduce the price down to the appraised value. They're not willing to do that. Your second option is you can pay the difference in cash. So that $100,000 property, you're under contract for $100,000. It only appraises for $95,000. What you would have to do is bring your down payment, your closing costs, an additional $5,000 to make up that gap between the purchase price of $100,000 and the appraised value of $95,000. I totally understand if you don't want to do that. I wouldn't want to. So your third option is you can back out and you would get your earnest money back within that appraisal contingency period. And that's usually anywhere from 10 to 15 days. After this point, you really need to buy the property. If you back out after this, you will lose your earnest money unless the seller defaults on the contract. And honestly, again, I think the seller is entitled to that deposit because they've had the property off the market for 15 days. They've started pre-packing to get out. And they're going to have to answer to every other buyer. Oh, what happened? Why did it fall through? Was it an inspection issue? Is there a problem with the property? So it really does can hurt that seller. From there, you're going to want to work on securing homeowners insurance. I usually tell people go with who your car insurance is with. They're going to give you a multi-line discount. Then the closing attorney, they do like payoffs and collections and deal with the paperwork to get it ready for our closing. 3 days before closing, you're going to receive what's called the closing disclosure. That is required for the lender to send it to you at least 3 days before closing. And that breaks down your payment again, and it shows you a cash to close number. That cash to close number, so the amount that you would need to wire to the closing attorney, the amount that you owe in cash, is sometimes off slightly from the actual cash to close. And the reason for that is the attorney does the last minute prorations for like taxes and HOA, and those are done on a daily at a daily rate. So the attorney doesn't love to do those calculations until right before closing because if for some reason closing got delayed a day or two, they have to recalculate all that. Your next step is you're going to want to make that wire transfer. And the reason that I bring up that cash to close number may be off slightly is due to this. You need to make your wire transfer at least the day before closing to ensure that it's going to get to the closing attorney on time. Something that you are going to sign a few documents about is wire fraud. Wire fraud is a thing. I've been fortunate enough in my 9 years that I have not seen wire fraud in any of my clients, but we do want to make you aware of how to protect yourself. So the closing attorney is going to provide you wiring instructions to make that cash to close payment. And those wiring instructions, to be clear, will never come from me and they will never come from the lender. They will only come from the closing attorney. Additionally, when you get those wiring instructions, most of the attorneys, they use a secured portal that you get a password for, and then you've got to log in to get that information. But if you want to be even more cautious, you can, once you get those wiring instructions, you can go Google the attorney's office, call the attorney, and ask whoever's there, hey, I want to confirm the wiring instructions. You don't want to do it from the phone number on the wiring instructions because if there was fraud, they would have a number that would help them commit that fraud. So go Google it. You can call and confirm it again. But you do want to do that wire the day before closing. Additionally, like I said, the number might not be final. So what we suggest is just rounding up, wiring a little extra to the closing attorney. And at the closing, the attorney is going to make you whole. They have to by law. They have to have that escrow account cleared out. If they don't, they would lose, they would, you know, wouldn't be able to have an escrow account and wouldn't be able to be a closing attorney. So they will provide you a check for any overage that you've paid and make you whole at the closing table. Next piece, we do the buyer conducts a final walkthrough. So again, the day before closing or the morning of closing, we're going to go to the property and we're going to ensure that it's in the same state that we agreed upon in the contract. Meaning, they didn't take the fridge that they said was staying. They didn't leave a bunch of stuff in the home. There isn't a major issue like a flood or a fire or something like that. Also, we can check those repairs. And why this is so important is because if we find something that wasn't agreed upon in the contract, then the seller is in default and we refuse to close until they make it right. So I've seen this happen a few years ago. I went to the final walkthrough. It was like 5 or 6 in the evening, and we were closing the next day at noon. We had asked the seller to do some repairs and they were written very specific. So like X, Y, and Z needs to be done to this items. And we look, and one of the repairs wasn't done correctly. So I called the agent. I was like, hey, like this isn't what we agreed upon. The contract stated X, Y, and Z you needed to do, and you didn't do that. We're not closing tomorrow until you have this repaired. And they had a contractor there at 8 a.m., fixed it, sent pictures, we closed at noon. When you refuse to close for an issue or for a situation where the seller is in default of the contract, you would be surprised how quickly people move. Most sellers need the money from the sale of this home for the next home, for something else, and they don't want that held up. So that is very important because on the other hand, if you had waited till after closing to say something, you really have to sue them, and no one wants to go through that process. So we'll do that final walkthrough, and then next thing, we'll go to closing, and you will sign your life away. If you don't pay, you don't stay. And then you'll get your keys, and you'll live happily ever after. Any questions? All right. So this is the home buying process. I know it's a lot of information that I'm throwing at you. I'm not expecting you to remember all of it. I just want you to have that overview. Remember, I'm going to be here throughout the process to help walk you through, to let you know when that earnest money is protected, to let you know, at this point, we're out of our contingencies. We're just waiting for closing. I'm here to help with all those pieces. So I hope this was helpful for you. Okay, the next thing that I want to go over is out-of-pocket costs. I think this is helpful to get an overview of what you're looking at in regards to the kind of cash you need to purchase a home. Oops. All right, it's just loading. All right, out-of-pocket costs. So down payment, that's going to be between you and the lender. 0%. It's hard to get unless you're a veteran or a doctor. that's usually the type of programs that you can get 0%. However, as a first-time buyer with good credit, you could do as little as 3% or 3.5%. Many people think that you need at least 20% down to purchase a home, and this is a misconception. So, and I think about it for myself. When I went to purchase a home, I didn't have 20%. And so, if I had waited to get 20%, I would have missed that appreciation opportunity. So, under 20% down, I only put 3% down, but it would have took me probably 2 years to save to have 20% to put down. And during that 2 year period, my property appreciated by at least $50,000. And I would have missed that opportunity if I had waited to get 20%. So I think if the numbers make sense and it's better for you to put 3% down, I think that's what you should consider doing. When you put less than 20% down, I know a lot of people talk about PMI or private mortgage insurance. So you are a riskier buyer when you have less than 20% down on the property. However, PMI is a very small expense in your payment. Um, and again, that the key to real estate and owning real property is the time of ownership. That's what gets you the value, is that appreciation over time. So for me, I think, it made a lot more sense for me to put 3% down instead of waiting, because I would have had to pay significantly more for the same property if I had waited the 2 years. Earnest money, this is that good faith deposit. This is applied to you at closing. Again, it's around 1 to 2% of the purchase price. Closing costs, we tend to estimate between 2 and 3% of the purchase price. I usually tell people estimate 3, so you're pleasantly surprised at closing when it's slightly less. And people always ask me, what are closing costs? Well, closing costs are going to be lender fees, like the origination fee. There's an admin fee sometimes. And then there's attorney fees. You have intangible tax that you have to pay when you purchase a property with a loan. You also are paying the attorney for like a credit report, to file the deed, to do their admin work. So there are a significant amount of fees associated with that attorney process and with the lender. Inspection, that's going to be based on the property type and square footage. To get 350, I only really see that in condos because they're only having to inspect inside the unit. So they don't have to do any of the exterior stuff. Tends to hit around 600 until we get into those bigger properties. And then we have some optional inspections. We had lead-based paint testing. You can do that. My inspector will tell you it is not worth the money. If the property was built before 1978, they will find lead-based paint. However, the thing to note about that is, and I will provide you a pamphlet all about lead-based paint, but the thing is you want it to be encapsulated, which is really painted over. As long as you're not sanding down to those lower layers of paint or chewing on the molding, you are going to be fine living in a home that was built before 1978. I have multiple clients that live in them, even with small children. You do want to be aware so that if you do renovations, you don't want to be breathing in, those paint particles on those lower, older levels of paint. I hope at this point a house would have been painted since 1978. Asbestos testing, this is also in older homes. I haven't seen this. Our inspectors will tell us, this is a sign we think there's asbestos, and then you should test at that point. Radon testing. Radon is an odorless gas that comes from granite deposits, mineral deposits in the earth. And it is actually the second leading cause of lung cancer after smoking. Most people don't know about this except for people that have purchased homes and realtors. I think radon testing is important. You're kind of hedging your bet, is how I look at it. If we do the testing and the levels come back high, then we're going to ask the seller to put a mitigation system in. If you decide not to do the testing, which is your choice, and when you go to sell, that buyer does the radon testing, then they're going to expect you to put the mitigation system in. Those mitigation systems cost anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000. It just depends on the layout of the property and the levels of radon. This is pretty common in Atlanta. If you look at radon maps of Georgia, you will see Atlanta is all red. So I suggest doing it on properties that have a basement. Usually if it's it could be in homes that are on a slab or on a crawl space, but it is much less likely in my experience, but it's your choice. If you want to do it on any property, that is definitely your choice. But I really, really recommend it on homes and basements. I also want you to know that this doesn't affect the value of your home. Um, I think last year I had three properties that clients bought that all needed mitigation systems in them. My brother has a house with a basement. His has a mitigation system in them. And the mitigation systems work. So we have it retested after the mitigation system is installed. And you will see those levels are in the acceptable range. And how it works is, your foundation of your house is kind of an upside down box. And that gas gets caught under the foundation and starts to radiate through the property and through the people that are living there. So what they do is they drill a hole into the foundation and they put a pipe, it's maybe about this big, and it comes into the foundation. It may be in multiple spots depending on, how big the house is and, what kind of system is needed. But they put it in there and then they run that pipe out the side or out the back of the house. And outside, they have like a little fan, like the size of a basketball. And that just constantly runs. It's super quiet and pushes everything up and over the house. So it takes that stagnant air from underneath the foundation and pulls it out so that the radon is not radiating through the house and you. We have tested homes after mitigation systems are in there, or I've tested homes when we go to make an offer and it already has a mitigation system. I've never seen an issue once a mitigation system is installed. Mold and air quality testing. Uh, that is something that I don't do often unless we find signs of mold. But again, this is your purchase. You have the choice if you would like to do that. If there's a pool, we'll do a pool inspection. Sewer scope, I do think this is a smart thing to do, just so that you have the confidence that there's no issues with that sewer line to the road or to the public sewer. So, it is an additional cost, but the cost to replace a sewer line is extremely expensive. So I think it's small in the grand scheme of things. Termite inspection. Uh, with my inspector that I use, it's around $50. I think you should do this on every property. They also do a full pest inspection. They're going to check for rodents in the attic and everything like that. So this is just, again, a nice thing to, have the confidence that you are buying something that's not going to have termite or pest issues. Appraisal, that's going to be based on the lender. Each lender is a little different, but it tends to hit between $500 and $600. Okay. Any questions about the out-of-pocket costs? Again, I hope this helps give you an idea of what kind of money you're going to need. The next thing that I want to walk through is the buyer brokerage agreement and what I do different from other agents. So, I don't know if you've heard about the NAR lawsuit, the National Association of Realtors. There was a national lawsuit last year in regards to that. And the big thing is the public, or what the lawsuit was about, is they were saying that we were not being transparent as agents in our fees. What I will say is that Georgia specifically has always been transparent and our fees have always been negotiable. So this really hasn't affected us in a huge way. But the big changes are one, a buyer brokerage agreement is required to be signed before showing homes. And that's for any agent. That is not a Keller Williams thing. That is every agent in the US is required to have a buyer brokerage agreement signed with a buyer in order to take them to see homes. And that's what this agreement is. And you'll see state law prohibits broker from representing buyer as a client without first entering into this written agreement under this code section. This agreement is solidifying our relationship, showing that, I'm going to represent your best interests and also protecting me as well, because I don't get paid until we close. Now, the things that I do different from other agents, specifically agency and brokerage. I do not offer dual agency or sub agency. Dual agency is where if I were to represent you as the buyer, I could also represent the seller as a client as well. That's like a divorce attorney representing both sides. It's definitely a conflict of interest, and I don't think um, that it's right for you. So we make it clear in this buyer brokerage agreement that we will not and do not offer that um, as a type of agency relationship. Sub-agency is similar to that. Um, I also mark it here that you do not consent to broker acting in dual agency capacity. Again, we do not offer that, but it is allowed in Georgia. So other agents may. So if you are interviewing with other agents, it is important to understand that. If for some reason, you liked a property that I had listed, I would refer you to another agent to ensure that we weren't doing dual agency. We would figure something out. Compensation. The other big change that we saw um, with the NAR lawsuit is that before we used to be able to see on the MLS what the compensation to a buyer's agent was. We used to say it there. Now that has been removed. We no longer see that compensation. Um, and however, we can ask what the compensation is by texting the agent ahead of time. What this talks about is compensation and the value of our service. Um, you know, what I do different from other agents is yes, this does say 3%. However, I can do it and help you for as low as 2.5%. If, you know, there's a lot of agents that require their compensation to be 3%. And that means if the seller's only offering 2% or 2.5%, that you would have to make up the difference at closing, right? So you'd have to bring your down payment, closing costs, an additional 1.5% to pay the buyer's agent. As mentioned, my goal is to do an amazing job for you and for you to refer me to your friends and family. That's worth a lot more to me than me trying to get you to cough up a half a percentage. I'm confident that the majority of sellers are paying compensation, and if they aren't, we can negotiate it in the offer. So as I said, I will reach out to agents before we go see homes and ask them how much the compensation is that they're offering and if they're offering any. And as long as it's 2.5% or more, then I won't say anything to you. We'll just keep it moving forward. If it's below that, I'll let you know beforehand. And then, if you still want to see the house, we can definitely do that. However, we'll just have to negotiate it in the contract and the offer. I haven't had an issue with this. I haven't had any buyers that have had to pay my compensation. I have been paid by the seller or the listing agent. So I don't see this being an issue, but I do like to make that clear that the one thing that I do different is I can take as little as 2.5%, and a lot of agents make you guarantee them 3%. The last piece here is the protected period. This is for 90 days. And what this is if I was the procuring cause for you purchasing the property and this agreement had ended or terminated, and I was the procuring cause and you purchased it within the 90 days after this expired, then I would be due compensation. And that means that, I took you to see the property, I sent you the property, I helped you see the value there. I'm not that worried about this because I know my value and I think that we're going to continue to work together and have a great relationship. The one thing that I like to say, and I'm very fortunate, I don't have to work with people that don't want to work with me. If before you're under contract on a property, you're ever unhappy with my service, you let me know. We will rip this agreement up and we will go our separate ways. I don't think, you know, I don't want to force anybody to work with me that doesn't want to, and that will make this process hard for everyone. Um, yeah, so if you have any questions, we can sign this now, Or I can send this to you digitally if you want to take some time to look it over. That is not a problem. All right. Um, those are the main pieces. Now, what I do is I walk through their wants and needs. So, like, tell me a little about what you're looking for in a property. Do you have an idea of budget? Because that's going to really affect the area and what you can get. Um, some people do and some people don't. Sometimes they have an idea, sometimes they really don't. But then we walk down, okay, bedroom count, bath count. Are you open to a townhome? Are you open to a single family home? Tell me some deal breakers for you. What is something that would cause you like this is 100% a deal breaker? I will not buy this property or be interested in it. Some people, it's different for everyone, but we do like to understand that. And what are the most important things in a home for you? Do you like open concept? Are you willing to do work on a property? And if you are willing to do work, what level of work are you willing to do? Are you just, yeah, I can do some cosmetic things, or you're willing to blow walls down and make it exactly what you want? We want to have a clear understanding so that I can tailor that search and have a, you know, show you things that you really want. At the end of